Happy to be joined this week on the podcast. Very topical guest this week. My favorite college football reporter, college reporter, period, in the universe, Pete Thamel of Yahoo Sports, my former peer at Sports Illustrated. Pete, thanks so much. We are recording this just after 6 p.m. on Tuesday evening. This will drop in about 12 hours. And it's been such a crazy, crazy time in college football. And what we know now, at least, is 2 of the 5 big conferences in college football are not going to be playing this fall, the Pac-12 and the Big Ten. Tell me what else we need to know about the 3 remaining conferences.
Great question, Peter. I would look at the Big 12 as kind of like the swing state in the election. Pick Ohio, Florida, Michigan, maybe Wisconsin, even, whichever you would like. The Big 12 is where all eyes are to next. As all the different leagues sort of set up their posturing for this week, it was very obvious that the Big 10 and the Pac-12 were going to go first, and there was going to be a attempt at least to get them to go together. And as those talks went through Saturday and Sunday, the reality was that the SEC and the ACC said, you know what, we set up plans to see if we could make it to the start of the season, and they pushed back the start of their seasons fairly significantly. And we designed what we did in our campuses to get through the students returning to campus. Because, Peter, the thing in my mind that has always been the untenable object in the way of college football playing in the fall is how do you handle it when thousands and most times tens of thousands of students come back to your campus? Obviously, some percentage of them are going to carry the virus. It's going to spread, etc. So the SEC and the ACC, as of now, Tuesday evening, 6:08 p.m., have plans in place that they want to see if they work. And they're confident they're going to try to do that. And they've reiterated that notion in statements. The Big 12, I was told yesterday that it was a little bit fractured. Today, I talked to 2 high-level sources in the Big 12, and there was some optimism going forward that they were going to follow the path of the ACC and SEC. So in the micro, going forward this week,
the ACC and SEC are leaning toward playing? Is that right?
Playing. So they're leaning toward trying to play. All right, that's where they are now. The SEC pushed their start date all the way back to September 26th. So they're still sort of in the starting phases of camp. The ACC start dates are a little bit earlier. Some of their teams are practicing in pads. There's a prominent ACC doctor that came out today explaining why they think it's safe to attempt to go forward. So that is those leagues' position right now. The Big 12, which has a call Tuesday night, could end up really doubling down and joining them, or it could go the other direction. There's some uncertainty there because of some of the disparities in opinion. But going forward, that's the basic thought process of those 3 leagues.
If the Big 12 decides to not play, what will that do to the ACC and the SEC?
So right now, they're posturing that they're going to keep going and see how the upcoming weeks go. Conventional thinking, Peter, and industry thinking is that if 3 of the 5 are gone, those 2 are going to follow. The safest bet is that the SEC is going to be last because they're the SEC, and they, at the very least, institutionally want to show that they care more. I do also think they have the safest, longest runway going up because if you don't start till September 26th, that means you really aren't going to start, quote unquote, camp until early September. I believe you get 25 days of camp, how colleges do it. So we're still obviously 2+ weeks away from that. The general thought process, SEC and beyond, is that you don't want to put players through camp if you don't think there's a chance to play. So as the SEC had approached this last decision to push back, the camp date for Greg Sankey, the commissioner, was a very important date. So I would do the math back and say somewhere around September 1st, September 2nd will be an important inflection point with the SEC. But we can't deny that the decisions of the other leagues are going to have a special pressure on the league in its decision moving forward.
You know, you had a tweet the other day that I thought was very interesting. After the Mid-American Conference said, we're not playing, you talked to a coach in the Mid-American Conference who said, in essence, that he had some worries about teams filching some of their players and trying to get the stars of the MAC, which, for those who don't know, that's Ohio University, Miami, Northern Illinois, Buffalo, Kent State, all those schools. It's a level down, obviously, from the Power Five. But
the journalism schools, Peter, are not a level down. I want to.
That is correct,
that.
my
I know you are an Ohio U grad. The journalism school is like Alabama.
Listen, I'm sorry for the men of Solich, though, that they won't have a chance. But my big question now is, okay, let's say that you are a player in the Big Ten or the Pac-12, and you have one of those, and you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't there some players in college football who can transfer and don't have to sit out because they will have done so much academically? Explain that. And also, if you can, explain whether you believe that, let's say, a really good player from Illinois or Wisconsin might transfer to Alabama to play football this year.
Yeah, it's a good question. I was joking with a longtime college official the other day. He said if an alien came down to Earth and you had to explain the nuances of college football, it would take like 3 weeks. And this transfer, I said as a preference to like this transfer coverage. Like the NFL, it's like they can be drafted, they can be free agents, they can be traded. In college, there's just all sorts of rules, and the rules have rules and subsets of rules and committees of rules. But basically, if you have graduated from your school, and this is a basic transfer rule, you can transfer without sitting out. The way that transfers have just sort of evolved with waivers, you pretty much can get a waiver with the same ease that you can go buy a pack of gum at CVS. And that's just for myriad reasons.
So is that going? Do you think that might happen in the next 2 or 3 weeks?
I think there will be some of that, Peter, but I think that what you'll get in these schools is their coaches telling them, hey, look, they're not going to play anyway. So why go there and sit out when you can redshirt, be with your team? Here's one of the most important things for your listeners to understand. I had about 10 coaches tell me this in the last 48 hours, all levels. They said, right now, if we cancel our season and I go stand in front of my team and deliver this devastating news, the worst news you can give them, this season that you've worked your whole life, your whole career for, came back, stayed on campus, risked COVID, worked out for, is gone. They said, I don't even have the basic answers to the questions they're going to ask. So the first thing they're going to say is, well, what about the spring? What's it going to look like? How are we going to play? Well, they really don't know yet. Well, what happens to my eligibility? If I'm a senior, can I come back? Like, how does that all work? They really don't know that either. And then if everybody gets a redshirt year, the coaches want to know how it affects their roster because they can only have 85 scholarship players right now. So there is an information void right now all around the sport. I have a hard time imagining the NCAA giving out, especially now at this point, Tuesday at 6 o'clock. I believe the number is 52 or 53 of the 130 teams have already punted on the season. Four conferences, handful of independents, your Connecticut Huskies, my UMass Minutemen, meaning the states where we were born. And I really think that it would be hard for the NCAA to punish by giving a waiver to players transferring from those 50-something schools to the other 80. Now, that's a guess because this is all.
You know what's so interesting about that, though? Look, Nick Saban a lot better than I do, but I would bet a lot of money that Nick Saban has a couple guys on his staff right now researching all of the schools in the Big Ten and the Pac-12 and looking to see where are the guys and who are the guys who can transfer and not have to sit so that maybe he gets an upgrade at left guard or maybe he gets a slot receiver from Ohio State. But do you think that there's a chance of any of that?
I think there's a chance, especially with the kids who've graduated. I don't think it will be this like unmitigated.
It won't be overwhelming.
Yeah, but one thing I think a lot of NFL listeners, Peter, and obviously that's a majority of your audience, probably don't know is that collegiate personnel departments have evolved to the point where they are the size of and sometimes bigger than NFL personnel departments. Now, a lot of that is recruiting, watching tape, and some of it is, nonsense. It's guys who make graphics, guys who reach out, guys who there is a whole industry of personnel in college football that essentially didn't exist 15 years ago. And it's been fascinating to watch it evolve and watch it multiply. And some college programs even have guys they call the GM now. So personnel acquisition is a big deal, and the transfer up, like players from the MAC who may go up. That's become a very big thing in the past 5 years, where if you're in the SEC, you're looking at Arkansas State, and if they've got a corner who graduates in 3 years and is all Sun Belt, he can come in and be your third corner. So that all exists, and there's tampering rules that are freely ignored. And as we move forward, it is scheduled, and who knows in COVID times, right? There's a lot of things that have been scheduled. But moving forward, Peter, it has been scheduled for there to be transfer rules eradicated come January. Now, some of those rules were supposed to come up this spring, and they had paused on because of the pandemic, and they didn't want chaos. That could happen again. But once there are transfer rules, if Ohio U finds a diamond in the rough at left guard, he redshirts and starts looking like an NFL prospect after his sophomore year, well, guess what? He's going to be able to go to Ohio State, Indiana, Kentucky, whatever it is, and the Group of Five conferences are going to start looking like minor leagues for the Power Five conferences. Yeah. And we have really already seen that in college basketball, where to the point in college basketball where I've had NEC level coaches, the lowest rungs of D1, tell me that's their recruiting pitch to guys. Hey, come here 2 years, we'll develop you and you can go to the Big East.
Yeah, that's interesting. Pete, so let's talk about how this basically is going to impact the NFL. I think it's hard for me to imagine. In my column a little over a week ago, a guy from Virginia Tech named Caleb Farley, a cornerback, wrote a piece in the column that basically said, this is why I'm opting out. Sure. I mean, look, that's 8 days ago. It seems like 8 weeks ago that he wrote that, Yeah. But his whole point was that, look, I can't risk passing this on to my family, so I'm going to the Exos training facility in Florida, and I'm going to train for the combine. And I said, wow, that's kind of revolutionary. But now it seems like a lot of guys, even if schools in these two conferences that now aren't playing, even if they say they're going to play in the spring, there's probably going to be a lot of those players who say, I'm not going to play. I'm just going to get ready for the combine, hope I get an invite to the combine, and then not play next year. If major college football is played in the spring, and we don't know that it will or won't, if it's played in the spring, how many guys do you think will play? How many guys, pro prospects, will drop out and just train for the NFL?
Again, this is a hard gauge to make, Peter, because I'm going to say if you are a top 100 prospect, well, what does that mean? Joe Burrow wasn't a top 200 prospect sitting here in mid-August last year, right? But and then some of it's going to come down to good old-fashioned height, weight, speed, and all those types of things. But I can't see any guys who would be, if you had draft grades of being a first, second, or third rounder, I can't see them play in the spring, and here's why. Nobody knows what the spring's going to look like because decisions haven't been made yet. But let's just say it starts February 1st. You're talking about a 3-month season, and then there's going to be some kind of playoff bowl. You're talking, at the earliest May, that your season's going to end. Now, the season will probably be shortened. Could be 6 games, could be 8 games, whatever it is. But what you don't want to do is have your season end in April or May, then maybe a Senior Bowl, which I still think is going to really be an important event. Jim Nagy, who runs the Senior Bowl, does a great job, told me a week ago in a story that they may petition the NFL to just let non-senior, let anybody in, just because the evaluations won't be there like they normally would be in the fall. He also said that he may make it 2 weeks because the NFL guys may want to get a feel. One of the things we know for sure is that scouts will not be going to practices this year. I can't see
Right.
that happening because of COVID, right? So there's an interesting process that I learned when I did the series for Yahoo a few years ago on the Dolphins scouting staff. Like, scouts are really like reporters, Peter. And so when they go to Alabama and LSU, they want to evaluate the prospects and body type them and see them live in practice. But they really want to know is, like, they want to talk to the academic counselors. They want to know if they smoke weed. They want to know if they're at the bars every night. That's really the value of the scouts, the character references. So the scouts have sources. They could be the strength coach. They could be buddies of theirs who they were GAs with 20 years ago, or position coaches. The best scouts are like the best reporters. They have the most sources. And that type of scouting on the NFL level just isn't going to happen this year. I had a scout call me the other day and just kind of pick my brain on like how I report from home, because they're going to have to do that. And if 32 NFL scouts get on a Zoom call with a strength coach that can be recorded, don't think the strength coach is going to be like, hey, yeah, Johnny slot receiver,
Right.
is a
that comes from sidling up to the guy.
Yeah.
Maybe on the pro day or on your visit to campus. It comes from sidling up to the strength coach and having him tell you that, hey, this guy doesn't love football. And he's not going to say that on a Zoom call. That's
Correct.
the problem.
Correct.
And what I believe, and Pete, I'm just going to tell you this right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote this a couple of weeks ago, and I really believe it. I wouldn't say that, I bet my house on it, but I believe it very strongly. Why was John Schneider of the Seattle Seahawks willing to pay 2 1s and a 3, including a 1 and a 3 in the 2021 draft? Okay. And then the other 1 is in 22. But he paid a 1 and a 3 in the 21 draft. And why was he willing to do that? I believe it's because of the incredible and tremendous uncertainty of the draft in 2021. And whereas there's a good chance that you are going to be drafting a guy at 23 who hasn't played a football game in 18 months or whatever, 16 months. And I think that's going to scare off some teams. And I would bet a lot, and just my gut feeling, that had something to do with why. First of all, you would say, man, you're giving 2 1s and a 3, and you're giving the 3 next year. So you're giving a 1 and a 3. A lot of people thought that's all you're going to get for Jamal Adams.
Yeah.
But I believe they wanted to basically, honestly, dump out of the 2021 draft, and maybe not dump out. That's too strong a word, but they're willing to sacrifice that for an absolutely positively sure thing like Jamal Adams. And I think this draft is going to be one of the most interesting drafts of all time, just because of how people are going to evaluate players.
Yeah. Well, I think, Peter, you set the tone properly for this upcoming football season, and you obviously wrote it to an NFL audience. But I remember reading it, tweeting it out, and I've been talking to sources. I say, you basically said, we just have to be prepared for the most unusual season in the history of football.
Yeah.
I forget when you wrote that, because I think it was April.
I wrote it on May 4th.
May 4th. Well,
yeah.
Come here on August, somewhere in the August teens, I think we are. You were, just unbelievably right. I just think that is that. And it's going to be fascinating in so many ways, Peter. Like, does the NFL make it through the season? I think is a legitimate question. And then are there scab games where they're rolling a couple guys from UNH and Villanova to block for Tom Brady in Tampa because a couple guys went to Mons Venus the other day? I mean, just the most valuable guys in front offices are going to be the ones who are evaluating the taxi squads or whatever they're calling them now. Like, I just envision Belichick having like 14 dudes ready at Foxborough High to like come on a whim and like slide in. So there are a lot of compelling aspects to this NFL season, but I think college will be criticized as this year goes on, because people are like, well, how's the NFL playing in colleges? How's MLB playing in colleges? And I thought Kevin Warren said this pretty eloquently today, that the new Big Ten commissioner, who you probably know from his time at the Vikings, Peter, he just said, look, these are amateurs and we don't want to take the risk. And I think there's a lot of risk going into this season, Peter. And
there's a lot of anger at people like Kevin Warren, to be sure. Yeah. And I wonder, just what will Nebraska do? Scott Frost is out there saying that, hey, we might play. and maybe I'm paraphrasing him incorrectly, but what does Nebraska do?
Peter, I am halfway through my column on that, which will be published on Yahoo by the time, but by the time your listeners get it. And Kevin Warren, I pinned him down on that on the phone today, as I was talking to him. I was like, look, Kevin, they're sitting here saying they're going to go rogue. Like, can they play? I said to him, can they play NCAA intercollegiate tackle football this fall against any opponents? And he said, no, not and be a member of the Big Ten Conference, which to me was basically like, you want your $50 million, Nebraska, to go 5-7 again? You know what? You could go sit and run some wind sprints in Lincoln, and we'll see you again in the spring. So I thought that was a Kevin, fancies himself a collaborator, as you need to be. The jobs of college commissioners are very different than an NFL commissioner. You're dealing with 14 college presidents. Now, I'm sure the NFL commissioner has 30-something crazy billionaires he has to deal with, which is going to bring its own set of problems. But I really thought that was a little window into Kevin Warren's inner fire and competitiveness today when he said, yeah, hey, Nebraska, like, basically, shut up. You're like everybody else. You're not that special.
Two quick questions.
That was a paraphrase, by the way.
I like it. I like it. Yeah. Two quick questions, and we'll end it here. But what about Trevor Lawrence, and what becomes of Trevor Lawrence? I assume I take it from this conversation that chances are maybe 50-50 that the SEC, or maybe a little bit better, that the SEC plays this year. Mm-hmm. And obviously, if the SEC and the ACC, if the Southern schools play, then this is kind of a moot question. But I think everybody is wondering about this guy who's probably going to be the first pick in the draft next spring. Does Trevor Lawrence, if the season is moved, does he play in the spring? And if the season is played in the fall, I'm assuming he's going to play in the fall.
So if the season is moved to the spring, I would tell you, Peter, with strong confidence, there's 0% chance that Trevor Lawrence plays. And now with the Big Ten in the spring, I think there's 0% chance that Justin Fields plays. And the FCS has already moved. I would say there's virtually no chance that Trey Lance plays. And if the season is in the fall, I'd expect Trevor Lawrence to play. He just did start the "we want to play" movement.
Yes,
so it would not be the best.
That's his hashtag.
Yes. I will say this about Trevor Lawrence through this pandemic. I've been around him. I wouldn't say I know him like I've gotten to know some of the other quarterbacks, like the Tebows and the Lucks and some of the guys I've been lucky to cover over the years. And Dak Prescott being another. Develop personal relationships who I can get to know. Trevor is a little bit guarded and, quite frankly, hasn't shown and flashed that much personality so far through those first 2 years. And Clemson wisely has been protective of him, and he's, I think, by nature, a little bit of a shy guy. Well, I will say this, during the pandemic, we've really started to get a window into who Trevor Lawrence is, and it's really promising for the NFL players. Now, look, talent-wise, there's no doubt, all right? Now, I can't sit here and stand on a table and say he's going to be the number one pick because I'm hearing a lot of momentum in NFL front offices for Lance, and I wouldn't discount Fields. Fields is pretty
Tell me a little bit about Lance. I know Fields and Trevor Lawrence, but I don't know much at all about Lance.
So Lance is the North Dakota State quarterback who is only a redshirt sophomore, and he had 28 touchdown passes last year, Peter, and 0 interceptions, leading North Dakota State to an undefeated FCS championship.
Yeah.
So he came off a redshirt season, went 28-0, so he could leave college as an undefeated national champion who has never thrown an interception. And I would stand on the table and tell you he will be a top 10 NFL draft pick this year.
Wow.
And I think I think it could be higher. Let me finish my thought on Lawrence quickly.
Go ahead. Yeah.
During the pandemic, he's raised a boatload of money for charity and really kind of like poked the NCAA into allowing him to do it, which led like Sam Ehlinger, the Texas quarterback, who I think is going to be a decent pro, and others to do that. And he spoke up about the Black Lives Matter movement before Dabo Swinney. I mean, he has been a much better voice for the sport than many of the most prominent voices in the sport. And, his sentiment and his ability to lead in this "we want to play" movement has been another thing that's really shown a little window into his heart. So NFL front offices and NFL fans should be really heartened as he evolves inevitably into one of the faces of the league, and his golden locks. And you can already see him doing a Pert Plus or whatever shampoos people use these days commercial. I really think we got to a little peek into the core of who Trevor Lawrence is. And it's pretty exciting, Peter. He's a special young man.
Pete, finally, so I would assume that, there's probably 1,500 players who are impacted by these two decisions today, 1,500 or so. There's a bunch of coaching staffs, however many, 22, whatever there is. But there's all of these people who've been impacted by this. And I wonder what is either the most emotional story you've heard, or what is the saddest story? Maybe it's with a coach, maybe it's with a player. And I don't want to be too dramatic, whose dreams kind of got crushed today in either the Pac-12 or the Big Ten. What stands out to you?
Couple thoughts. I got a text message from Anthony Brown, who's the quarterback at Oregon. He's competing to be the quarterback at Oregon. He was at Boston College, started for 3 years, transferred to the West Coast to have a shot and go win the job and win the national title. So he reached out today. I just felt awful for him. You move. He's from New Jersey. You move 3,000 miles across the country. You spend 3 months under these crazy conditions, trying to acclimate with new teammates, try to impress, win a job, all while wearing a mask under these crazy conditions. And now all of a sudden, he was one of the graduate transfers we referenced earlier. Now all of a sudden everything's ripped away from you. So, as my text messages were sort of going like a slot machine today, I saw a text from Anthony, and it hurt my heart. It's just like getting to know him a little bit when he was there.
What did he say? What did he say? I'm so sad.
He sent a couple of emoticons, Peter. You know how the players, the younger generation is. But I'd had a couple conversations with him. He'd been texting for information. Like everybody else, nobody knew what was happening. What do you think is going to happen? How do you think it's going to be unfold? So I just kind of thought of him today, leaving his life behind to go chase a dream 3,000 miles away, and now all of a sudden that hits pause and gets interrupted. I feel for Ryan Day, who really had a team that, again, could have really won the national title. They really felt like Justin Fields was going to be the best player in college football at Ohio State. They have two offensive linemen who project as first-round picks. They have a very, very talented roster. They were really impressed by Trey Sermon, the Oklahoma transfer. They thought this was a generational team at Ohio State. And so that's just to have that pulled away from you, the level of competitor a guy like Ryan Day is. I definitely thought about him and fell for him today. But I couldn't agree more with your observation, Peter. I mean, hundreds and thousands of lives interrupted. You're talking about people who run hotels and restaurants in these college towns. It just reverberates all the way down to the ticket takers and the ushers and everything. I mean, college football is a multi-billion-dollar business, and it's essentially hanging up a close sign, or starting to hang up a close sign for the fall, and the reverberations are going to be felt for years and years to come.
One final thing: how many times will, let's say, a player at Clemson, okay? How many times per week, if it is multiple, how many times per week will a player at Clemson be tested, for COVID? Do you have any idea?
So one of the issues as we push forward here is that the NCAA has done very little during this pandemic in terms of leadership, and there is not a uniform college football testing. And so the Big Ten, which just obviously shuttered shop today, was going to have twice a week mandatory testing. Off the top of my head, I don't know what the ACC's is. Everybody released their own policy. So it's been funny. It's like you're tracking 5 sports, not one.
Right.
It's like Pac-12 is doing this day. So I do think there will be testing. The big issue for colleges, Peter, that the NFL isn't facing is contact tracing. If other than COVID, if somebody had to say to me, why can college football not be played in the fall? It's contact tracing. I heard rumblings yesterday that, for Northwestern and Illinois, if they have one positive, the whole team has to shut down. Now in the NFL, they're testing guys every other day, and contact tracing is 2 days. And I think that cuts to the heart of some of the uncertainty and why the Pac-12 and the Big Ten did what they did today.
Yeah. the NFL is testing every day, and I believe that that's going to continue. They were only supposed to do it for the first 14 days of camp, but I've heard that there's been tremendous pressure from teams, and not just from the Players Association, which wants daily testing, but from teams that they really want that to continue. And at the very least, they'll test like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but I believe they're probably going to at least start the season testing daily, which I think they really need to do. But anyway, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and I think the best case for college football in the spring, Peter, is that rapid daily testing becomes available on all these campuses.
If it the problem with the rapid test is that I think the NFL figures show that it's like 85 to 87% accurate, and the other test, the nasal swab test, is up in the upper 90s. And so I think although the NFL is going to incorporate that sort of instant test into its repertoire, they don't want to have it be the prime focus first, but I agree with you. I think in the colleges it's crucial.
Yes,
it is.
The technology has to advance, Peter. To where that 80% is in the higher 90s. And at that point, if you can test every player before they walk in your facility every day, and you can test every lunch lady and quality control guy and coach and staff member, I think administrators, presidents, commissioners are going to feel a lot less queasy about moving on with the season.
Pete Thamel, Yahoo Sports, really, really appreciate you educating me on this. I had no clue a half hour ago. Now I am filled with knowledge. So thank you very much.
Peter, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, man.